Pasha Paroh Y Net 7. Thank you for tuning. Got Nicole Sublette with us today. She's back. Introduce yourself since it's been a while. Let people know who you are and what you're into.
Absolutely. So my name is Nicole Sublette, and I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor. I've got to rechange the tag because this is my spouse's name here on the Zoom. It's not, my name's not Chris, it is Nicole, but I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor. Also, pardon me, I am recovering from just a little bit of a cold. I have little kids and they were sick. And I'm also getting my doctorate in natural medicine, and I'm a certified integrative medicine provider and certified clinical hypnotherapist as well.
Boom. So thank you for
Yes.
being here today, overcoming all of the above to help spread the message and help people heal globally.
Yeah.
So we've been doing some conversation about trauma. Got this book. I'm on like page in the time I have to read instead of working on all this stuff. I'm on like page 59. And we've been talking about trauma lately on the page, because when I'm reading this, it like connects with all this other stuff I know, and it's like, boom, right? All this stuff is popping up. So trauma being healed holistically, like there's a few different ways, accessing the brain, the mind, the physical body. Tell us a little bit about that.
So trauma in general, and that's a great book that you have. And I love that the connection between trauma and the body and trauma and the mind, and it's all interconnected, as if we tend to separate body, mind, spirit, but there's no such thing. It's a fake, it's a fake division. And so there are just so many ways to access trauma, but just a little piece about trauma is that we can each experience a trauma, and those memories from traumas, whether it's we have one trauma or multiple traumas, they can be stored in our body. And then how do we know that they're stored in our body is because of the way that we respond. Yes, the body keeps score, and the way that we react to things. And so one thing that we might know that trauma is still stored in the body is that we're going into situations and we have constant and frequent alarm bells going off. So even situations that are actually safe may seem unsafe. For example, someone who's in a car accident, they might have increased hypervigilance every time that they get in the car or are on the road, thinking that they're unsafe, when in fact they actually might be safe, or that they might not actually end up in an accident, but it's that perpetual feeling like something's going to happen, or the alarm bells are going off.
Yeah, it's a great book. I actually, Dee was on the channel the other day, the sexologist. She's where I got the recommendation from. I'm talking to her. I was like, oh, what's that book? So I had to start reading it because I felt like there was a connection. If I learned this stuff, it was going to help me be a better artist, right? To help people heal through art, which is part of what we're talking about here today. So what this is going to do also in this video is connect how we may have, for those people that are bashing like rap music, we're going to connect this through your professional expertise to how it may be a good thing of what they're presenting and why, okay? So as we mentioned, art, expressive art such as yoga, dance, massage, singing, help to dislodge or bring back to reality the mind from the past trauma to be in a moment. Explain how we're going to disconnect through yoga, dance, massage, singing, disconnect from the trauma that memories may be triggered by current events that are non-threatening, like you mentioned, and cause that same tension, stress, and etc. in today's current life in the moment. Tell us how we disconnect from that using yoga, dance, massage, etc.
Certainly. And so we can think of trauma as like a state of being frozen, right? And so when we can use things like somatic healing or movement, and emotions, deep-seated emotions tend to store in things like the hips. especially for women, a lot of women. And so when we do things like yoga or deep stretches and bends, we can have what we call like a release from that frozenness. It's almost as like sometimes trauma can be like analogous to being like an ice cube, right?
Mm,
And through movement, through art, through music, we're becoming water again. And water is the original state, right?
mm.
So we're
Molten
becoming our
salt.
original state. Ice is not the original state. Water is the original state.
Okay. Okay. So Bruce Lee, be like water, allow yourself to crash. So I like that you brought up how it's stored in the hips and female and women, for example, and working it out is kind of like that massage. Is that why like a massage is so, you know, detoxifying?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So what's this about neurofeedback? Give us a little bit about that and how that helps.
So depending on, you know, how we're using kind of feedback modalities, but when we use feedback, is using our body as ways, as a mechanism to help us, one, to rewire the states of how we
Mm,
are, and two, how do we learn different states of being. So for example, one thing that's really like up and coming, well, it's been around for 30 years, but that's coming in the mainstream, is like heart rate variability, and how our hearts and the way our hearts work and the mechanism of our hearts, how that corresponds to our psycho emotional states. And so when we practice getting into a state of coherence, which means a state of being more relaxed, a state of more joy, a state of more gratitude, peace, and bliss, when we're focusing on our hearts and dropping into those more relaxed states, using the feedback of our body, we can become more calm, and we're not constantly in that fight, flight, or freeze. Because when we think about life in general, life can be stressful. And when we're stressed out, we're in that state of fight, flight, or freeze. We're always in that survival mode. If we're always feeling like we got to go, 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 and we can't relax, that means we're in that sympathetic state of survival
mm.
constantly. And we need to learn to move from the sympathetic state, which is the fight, flight, freeze state, the survival state, into the parasympathetic, which is the restorative state, the relaxed state, the peaceful state. It's actually where the body can actually start to heal and regenerate itself.
So that's environmental effects that are being manifested internally. Organization plays a great role in that. When I was doing the research on EMDR, right? It's all about reorganizing and reprocessing trauma. So you brought up stress, and I know that's a byproduct, directly or indirectly, of traumas. How does that connect with people's everyday life? Like the current state of the country or nation or America or the United States, whatever you think you're in, generally speaking, for the people out there, the work life situation, the quality of life post what's remaining, having worked tons of hours, stressed on people's jobs, company short staffed, right? How do more people not realize that they're under stress? Or do you think they do and they're just not processing it as stress to look at it as a traumatic experience?
I think that's,
I
I'm
know
not
it's
going to try to not drop super deep, because I actually think that's I think it's a super deep question.
more people need you.
And my, and my conceptualization of that is that we live in a very, we live in a society that is really focused on productivity. When we meet someone, the first thing we ask them is, well, what do you do? And so when we live in a society that's focused on productivity, requirements, quotas, times, and deadlines, it keeps people in the state of stress, and also keeps people in what is called a normalized state of stress. But when you have people stressed, because underneath stress, a lot of times is fear, a fear of scarcity, a fear of not having, a fear of losing, a fear of not being able to survive.
Mm.
When people are stressed, you can also control them. You can expect more. You can also demand more. So we normalize it. And then in our country of the way we treat things, if we're talking about how we treat things, and then what we do is instead of looking at root cause, we actually just are reactive and we treat symptoms, which might be through like psychopharmacology. So, oh, you're stressed. Well, here's a pill. Here's this, you're supposed to, so there's all these things to keep people in a stressful state. And also anyone who is vulnerable to systemic oppression, it's easier to control them if they're in a stressful state. But when we actually are more relaxed states into the parasympathetic, where we can restore, rest, and heal, we can actually know our power. Think about when we make a decision. When we make a decision, is this decision have normally a better outcome when we're coming from a centered, rested, peaceful state? Or does a decision better when we're coming from a stressed out, reactive state?
Right.
And is it just a reaction instead of, okay, this is my heart, this is my instinct? Am I just reacting to a situation? So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I think about us being in a perpetually stressed state. I think it's actually intentional for us to be in a perpetually stressed state.
For me and majority of people watching on a Y Net 7, yes, I think we're going to interpret that. And if not, we're going to do some more research for those that have questions, and we'll follow up. But I like the fact that you brought up the reaction state versus the ability to take time and respond, right? So we're in a constant reactive, which is that fight or flight or freeze factor. So now the EMDR, okay, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Yeah.
I guess that's the long version of the Men in Black when they put out the thing.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
So what is being done in that situation is the person is being treated, and this, from my standpoint, is, it's entertainment purposes. I'm not giving any medical advice. I know you're a professional. You have expertise and credentials on this. So the person being treated recalls distressing experiences, per my notes here, while doing bilateral stimulation.
Right.
Tell us about what that actually means.
So I am not an EMDR therapist, but I do work in the realms of that. And so basically it's a way to reprocess a traumatic memory. And so a person has a desensitization, so they're not in that hyper vigilant, hyper aroused state. And so it's a way of doing it. And they found that when we are experiencing a traumatic event, like the state of our body or even like the movement of our eyes, there is doing different things. And so it's a different way to reprocess traumatic memories in the body and to kind of actually have a new rewiring of the body.
Again, now we're taking that question that you said earlier, right? As part of perpetual stress, right? When you said people meet people and they first thing out of our mouths generally is, hey, what do you do? So I see how often people are confused when you don't ask them first and you still say, hey, how are you? Or who are you? Like you, not like what do you do, but tell me about yourself and what you enjoy. So now being controlled easier under those stressful situations, right? It actually, with the EMDR, we're giving them something to do, to reorganize, kind of like you're reorganizing your living room. Like you don't want this over here anymore, you want to put it out, or maybe it's time to throw this out, right? Desensitization is a very interesting word. So I'm looking at it like this. If we're doing movements and stuff to de-associate or desensitize ourselves from the traumatic experience, now when we look at the rap song that people may be so against because of the lyrics, talking about someone getting killed and then celebrating at the club or what have you, right? While they're dancing, doing these movements, is that technically EMDR for the community of people that live with that experience on a daily basis?
I mean, dancing, movement, flashing lights, right? Um, there's so many ways to answer your question though, there's so many ways to get it. So EMDR is definitely a way to get at trauma, and it's known for its efficacy. I myself, as a trauma specialist, I work with trauma in different ways. Doing somatic work, toning the vagus nerve, doing auricular treatments on the ear, which you and I have talked about, somatic movement, grounding, and different things like that. And so, as a longer way of answering your question, I think like we can have movement or use movement at the clubs as another way to move through and reprocess trauma, and using somatics as a way to heal through dance, through expression, through joy, the club, through community of like-minded people, people of similar interests, which can
Mhm.
have a safety effect for some people, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so I think it can be a very healing way. Sometimes, what I find is interesting because I have a client who is, a lot of my clients are therapists and medical doctors, but I have a client who's a therapist. She's an EMDR therapist, and she's done EMDR for her own trauma, but we're actually doing cognitive uh, processing therapy, because even though she's worked through her traumas and is desensitized, she
Mhm.
still has the cognitions that, like dealing with self-worth or thinking things that are like some of the baseline feelings are actually still there, the feelings of shame, feelings of guilt, and low self-worth. And so there's many ways to treat trauma too, because there's also that cognitive piece. We can become desensitized to an event that happened to us, but sometimes we can feel like, oh, it was my fault, or I feel worthless, or, it's my fault that my parents don't like me, or they abuse me, or my spouse abused me, and things like that. So there's
Mhm.
also that thinking piece. And for me, another aspect, another way I do, because I'm a hypnotherapist, is that I think a lot of change is also made through the subconscious realm as well. That's something that's really of note, because it's like analogous to a person who's on a diet, right? And they're like, I'm on a diet and I got an exercise plan, and they see a piece of cake and they eat it. It's because even though they have the conscious intention of making the change, the subconscious is actually still driving the show. And that is actually where we do like the majority of our thinking, the majority of our patterning is actually all subconscious. And if we think about
Mhm.
that in the context of childhood trauma, in the ages 0 through 7, we're in a theta wavelength, meaning we're in a hypnotic state 0 through 7. So if we have really crappy caretakers 0 through 7, we're going
Mhm.
to believe a lot of untrue things about ourselves, which are inherently traumatizing.
So I can agree with everything you just said, and looks like the daily physical activities, the engagement in that play a role. If we drop into music and stuff, it looks like as much as people complain about it, it has some therapeutic value. Or let me say, as much as the group that complains about it, because it's not everybody. Some of us appreciate, we turn it up, we boom, we bang, even people that own a business are like, yeah, we're gonna, because football, it's all about killing the competition. So people associate with how they want to, but this illustrates the added customer value, so to speak, for how it actually helps heal certain communities. So that's your physical activity, because we're taking that stuff in. Meditation, we're taking that in, we're allowing it in. Turn off the television, maybe turn on some rap, you know what I mean? But when you brought up a good point, because you mentioned about our connections once you start talking about associations and relationships with others, especially during theta state. If your parents aren't knowledgeable what they're doing, then we could be scarred for life. So talk more about the
Yes.
connections, because again, we got people every day going to work. They're in toxic workplaces. They don't realize it because they didn't look up what a toxic workplace was. Speak more about connections and how you address maybe what people's challenges are with that holistically.
Well, I think a good litmus test of things, or if we're talking about like toxic workplaces or relationships or things like that in regard to trauma and stress, is that look around. I recommend for people to look around, look at the quality of your relationships, look at the quality of your job, your financial situation. Just look at the different qualities around you. And
Mhm.
if you are having any sense of dissatisfaction, then that begs for deeper questioning.
Mhm.
So what happens is, if we talk about childhood experiences, that humans like comfort. So we draw into things to us that are natural to us and comfortable to us, even if they're painful, even if they're traumatic to us. So, for example, many times people will end up in relationships with someone just like their caregiver. So, if their caregiver was unkind or emotionally distant, then a lot of times people will have a partner that's unkind and emotionally distant. Why? Because the human gravitates toward what's normal and what's comfortable. And then also there's subconscious programming that well, that's what I'm worth and that's what I'm used to and that's like what I deserve and I can't achieve any better. So I'm going to work in this workplace, and yes, I'm being underpaid, and yes, there are systemic factors in which people are underpaid, racism, sexism, and things like that. So I don't want to disqualify those things, but sometimes we will take things that don't let us up because what um we had programming around scarcity, we had programming around worth, right? Like, oh, your job is who you are. You can't be an artist because that's not worth anything, even though yes, that's going to make you happy. But your parents were saying, no, you need that corporate job in which your boss harasses you all the time, because that's actually where your worth is by how much you make, even though you're absolutely miserable. So it's because we have a lot of that programming in, which can be traumatic. And so if we're living a life in which we're constantly reactive, right? And we're not happy, it's probably because we're traumatized.
Yeah. You watch your parents grow up complaining, gritting, going out the door every day to their job, and the trauma that the stress on their relationships brought back indirectly from their experiences that they're having, not realizing the contagiousness of it. So we go into the daily activities. Um, I think you made a great point for people to consider when you said the dissatisfactions, right? Because again, it goes back to the addiction. We got to go back to it so we can keep being addicted, so we can get the dose of endorphins, right? And what we're actually dissatisfied about may slip our mind unless we keep some record about it. How does daily journaling transcribe in all of this?
Daily journaling is a great thing for those who can dedicate to the practice. But I mean, I think journaling can offer a reflection of where we're at and help us also keep record of where we're at. And it's also great to go back if one has a journal to see, oh, this is where I was and this is where I have shifted to. So I think journaling can be a really um effective tool.
So what does the diet, what role does the diet play in a situation?
Anxiety
The diet, our diets.
or diets. Oh my gosh. Um so much. And so one thing, if we're talking about trauma and we're talking about stress, we know that if we're traumatized or stress, it really impacts our immune system. When we're having cortisol flushed through our body, norepinephrine, uh, basically what happens is that the immune system becomes suppressed. When we're experiencing a traumatic event, we actually stop fighting off disease. Also, if we're a traumatic event, because all the blood is rushing to our limbs, so we can run, fight, or freeze. And so it's moving from our gut, and the gut microbiome also is humongous in regulating our mental health, because in our gut is where we're producing neurotransmitters, those things that make us feel good,
Mhm.
to our brain. And also, if we have if our gut microbiome is off, then we can have things like increased inflammation within the body, autoimmune disease, which is all tied into also stress and trauma. So it's like it's this secular it's a cycle of things. And so diet is incredibly important. We also want to make sure though that we're absorbing um the foods, the nutritional aspects of our food, because a lot of times if we're having constant stress and trauma, we're not absorbing always all the nutrients that we need
Mm.
for health. And so a person can actually have a great diet and still be sick because they're stressed or traumatized, because their gut microbiome is off and they're not absorbing some of the nutrients. Some of the things that are super really good for the immune system are things like vitamin D, vitamin A, um, and vitamin C. Those are really good vitamins to have in the body. Zinc is really good. It's really helpful for the immune system, and also magnesium and vitamin B, which can help the body become more restful and more peaceful, more relaxed.
Hmm. So you bring up the vitamins, absorption factors.
Hmm.
We'll get to the environmental osmosis. We kind of conversated about it, but we'll spend some time on there in a moment. So that would by default bring in water content, you know what I mean, making sure we get enough water.
Hmm.
You brought in the restfulness, so that's going to be sleep. A lot of the digestion is much more efficient when we're asleep or at rest. So affecting the having a lack of rest and dehydration all plays into this. We got to manage that better as people. So I read somewhere on a scientific level that cortisol never actually dissipates from the body. The level just keeps going up and the body just keeps masking it, which is what makes it such a threat, because it's not like, you know, alcohol, for example, where you could drink it, you get the effect, and then
Right.
your body flushes it out. It's always there. Is that true, first of all? And then let people know the danger of that, because the body masks this and the feeling of it, so we don't know it's there. We don't know when we're reaching a critical level of it. Is that
You know,
how we're looking at this?
y- I think that's a really interesting thing. And one thing that I know that I study healing all the time. I'm someone like I'm either reading about healing, watching podcasts about healing. I mean, it's my wheelhouse. And so I know when I hear things about like cortisol levels and things like that, but I also know that the human body is really miraculous.
Mhm.
And that so for people who might have like MS lesions for one day, for them to all be gone, or to have cancer and it to be gone. So I don't know. I really don't know, because I think that I'm sure there's some science to what they're saying, and like cortisol levels and things like that, but also the body is a really magnificent thing. And so could something happen in which cortisol levels could lower? I Is it out of the realm of possibility? I think yes. But I'm not sure. Because I think that we're still learning about the body,
Mhm.
and that the body is also, self regenerative, right? And so we don't have the same bodies that we had like when we're even children.
Right.
Um so yes, I'm saying yes to what you're saying, and also is it possible that it could change miraculously? Potentially.
Again, great segue, because that leads us right into environmental factors. If we're talking about osmosis, right? We know we're talking about antennas on YNet7. We're talking about frequencies. We're talking about broadcasting and receiving energies. So if you have evoked or invoked this internally into you, this dis-ease, this disorder, then your body's wanting to push it out, right? But if the environment around us is of material matter circumstance that prevents the flow out, now it's trapped inside. So this is where we get into changing environments promotes healing. We got a little under 10 minutes here. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about how changing an environment, like you said, being in a job, not realizing what's happening to you, and then freeing yourself of that, period, not just going somewhere else where you're not going to know what's happening to you till later, but being able to elevate and free of that now allows stuff to bleed out of you, so to speak. Tell us about the environment factor.
I think environment's incredibly important to healing. It's just like when we think about when people who go on vacation or have respite, all of a sudden they get better or start to recover from illnesses. And so I think environment's incredibly important, because environment is a huge source of stress. And so if we're in an environment that is um incredibly toxic
Mhm.
to us, there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of reactivity, it's keeping us in that sympathetic in that survival mode, then we can really be worn down. And so it's really important to try to control the environment where we can. And how do we do that? By like trying to maybe determine where we work, have a good work-life balance, or who's in our inner circle, what relationships do we pursue, which relationships do we kind of back away from. But I think one of the most important things, no matter the environment, is actually the internal environment. How do we learn to not become triggered? And that's a whole other skill set. But how do we not internalize when someone's reacting or say that they're yelling at us, and then we have that that instinct to sometimes be defensive? How do we not internalize someone else's triggers? How do we not internalize someone else's traumas? And if we can try to make our internal environment a little bit more immaculate, then we can actually better navigate external environments, because we can become less reactive as well.
That's the $1,000,000 question right there. How to not allow others' broadcast influence to have negative effects on you in a democracy, right?
Yeah.
But we got a little over 6 minutes. I want you to take a moment to tell the people how they can reach you and what the limitations of how you can help jurisdictionally, and give you a moment to cover anything that you want to bring up relative to this that we haven't yet.
Absolutely. So my name is Nicole Sublette, and last name is S as in Sam, U, B as in Bravo, L, E, T as in Tango, T as in Tango, E as in Echo, Nicole Sublette. So you can look at me at NicoleSubletteCounseling.com, or Nicole Sublette. You can Google me. You can find me on Instagram and also Facebook, and then also through my website, NicoleSubletteCounseling.com. And so I am a licensed psychotherapist. I do specialize in trauma and also treating trauma, anxiety, depression holistically. Uh, I specialize in also working with BIPOC, LGBTQ populations as well, anyone who's vulnerable to systemic oppression. And so I do a few things. As far as psychotherapeutic realms, I practice in the state of New Hampshire. I do also help people across the country. I can offer holistic coaching services. Coaching is different than therapy, but if people have a question about that, they can certainly ask me the difference, which is coaching can be as important as therapy. I also do hypnotherapy for folks as well. So anyone who's interested in making any kind of change, right? Whether it's, weight loss, quitting smoking, whatever it might be, hypnotherapy is highly effective for so many things and in so many ways. And so I do a broad range of things, and helping people to start living ways optimal lives. And also the biggest thing is helping people to stop internalizing other people's stuff, which is really important, is teaching people how to be less reactive to others triggers, others traumas, and how we can live in more peaceful internal states.
So unofficially, not a diagnosis, we can conclude that mosh pit songs and rap music and heavy metal in some cases is healing.
Absolutely. I love heavy metal. And I think heavy metal is really equivalent to classical music in many ways. I think music is healing. And I know we didn't even talk about this, but there's all kinds of things, cymatics, rife sound frequency. I also do sound healing too. Um, Sound healing is an entirely different thing, but I think it's a beautiful, beautiful modality that we're going to find more mainstream in the future as time goes on. Yeah. So rap music, mosh pits, heavy metal, whatever makes your soul like vibrate, feel happy and expansive, that is healing. If it makes you feel good, expansive, that's healing.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really grateful for your presence today. You came, you shared
Absolutely.
this with us with the ears. We talked about the electricity healing, and you're
Oh,
here today expanding on holistic trauma treatment. So we definitely going to get you back in the future to talk about sound. Okay.
awesome. Wonderful. What a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Always the perfect day. Say bye to the people, Nicole.
Goodbye. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
Pasha Paroh Y Net 7. Thank you for tuning.